The mechanics of actually working with arrays is pretty straightforward. We're going to look at some code to show us how exactly that works. We'll start by declaring and instantiating an array of 500 integer values. So by default, they're all initialized to 0. So essentially, this looks actually pretty similar to a normal object declaration and instantiation, but we're saying, hey, I need an array of ints. I need it big enough to hold 500 elements and point a variable of type int array added called ABC. If we want to refer to something in that array, we'll just use this general format. The name of the array, square bracket, whatever index we want to refer to, and then we close the square bracket. So as an example, ABC sub 3. Okay, that index that we pass in, it's got to be between 0 and length minus 1 inclusive. If you're wondering, subscripting has the same precedence as method selection. So when we have a class, we call it static method, or when we have an object and we call an instance method, same precedence as referencing an array. So that would happen left to right. Okay, so let's look at this code. We've got an int array being declared of length 500. We're declaring an int called I and initializing it to 3, declaring an int temp and a double average first 5. Okay, so if we look at these first lines of code in the second chunk, so okay, ABC sub 0, 78. Well, that just means the 0th element in this array of 500 integers is now 78. It used to be 0, now it's 78. ABC sub 1 is 66. So it used to be 0, and now it has the value 66. ABC sub 2 is ABC sub 0 plus ABC sub 1 divided by 2. So that means ABC sub 0 was 78, ABC sub 1 was 66, because we just changed those. Adding them together, divide by 2. So we're saying ABC sub 2 is the average of sub 0 and sub 1. Okay, ABC sub I will be 82. What we really mean is ABC sub 3. Now that'll have 82 as its value. And we've got ABC sub I plus 1, which means ABC sub 4, element 4 in the array. That'll now have the value 94. Now as a last item here, to initialize the last element in the array, we have to actually index in using 499 for length 500. Remember, because we're 0 indexed, we actually only go up to length minus 1 as the highest index. If you actually try to go to ABC sub 500 or ABC sub -1 or anything outside of that range from 0 to the length minus 1, the JVM actually throws an array index out of bounds exception. And it behaves pretty similarly to how the machine would behave if you were trying to divide by 0. So that means in this example, the subscript have to be between 0 and 499. Later, we're going to see how we can work with arrays of any size, where maybe we don't even know how big the array is, and how we can write loops that aren't tied to one particular literal value like 500. So if we wanted to average the first 5 elements, we could do it just like this. ABC sub 0 plus ABC sub 1 plus ABC sub 2 plus ABC sub 3 plus ABC sub 4, sum them all together, divide by 5, and store that into average first 5. So that's fine, pretty straightforward. That could get a little tedious if we wanted to, say, find the average of an array of 100 ints, but for our purposes right now, just these 5 integers, that's no problem. That looks pretty good. One thing we're going to have to do a whole bunch, lots of situations, is swap 2 elements. So it's worth taking a look at what needs to happen in order for us to be able to do that. I want you to imagine that this is an array starting at 0, going all the way up to length minus 1, whatever the length is. So we're sort of we'll work with an arbitrary length here. If you want, you can still think of it as ABC, which has a length of 500. Well, if I want to switch elements I and I plus 1, I need some kind of temporary storage where I can store a value during the swap. Start by taking one of the values and storing it in the temp. We take whatever was in the other value, store it in the first value, and then we take whatever was in the temp and we put it back in the second value. That's these 3 lines of code down here. Temp equals ABC sub I, ABC sub I equals ABC sub I plus 1, ABC sub I plus 1 equals temp. So we're using that temp as a place where we can sort of write down our values without having to overwrite anything and lose data. Okay, one last thing. If you want to know an array's length, if you want to know how many spaces it has, we can use this right here, array name.length. Okay, that's a public instance variable that all arrays have. Note that there are no parentheses here. There are no parentheses. This is not a method. This is a public instance variable. So we could print out a statement like this. The size of ABC is abc.length. Okay, we'll dive into more next time. For now, make sure you can handle these few topics before you close up shop. We want to be able to index into an array to access a particular element. What's the error that is actually thrown if we try to access something outside of the edges of an array? How do I swap two elements in an array? Be able to write some code that does that. And how do I get an array's length? Remember, it is a public instance variable, not a method. Common mistake. That's it for today. See you in the next lecture.